In this recipe, I use a combination of sourdough leaven and Poolish to produce this super soft, pillowy hot dog bun, which is just bursting with flavour. The dough is carefully enriched with sugar, milk and butter, which makes this the perfect vehicle for sausages, bacon and egg, chip butters, whatever you want. So my kitchen is pretty chilly at the moment. It's around 16 degrees Celsius, that's 61 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to be using my fermentation chamber, and that is set to 25 degrees Celsius. That's 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Important to remember, the warmer the temperature, the quicker the fermentation will happen. And of course, the cooler, the slower things are going to go. Now, use my baking timeline as a guideline only. So it's 9 o'clock and it's the evening before I'm going to be baking, and we're going to knock up our pre-ferments. Now, for this recipe, we need 55 grams of sourdough leaven and we need 69 grams of Poolish, which is our yeasted pre-ferment. Now, I'm going to make just a little bit more than I need for each of them because they are going to lose just a little bit of weight during the long fermentation, and of course some get stuck to the inside of the jar. So for the Poolish, I'm using 40 grams of room temperature water, 0.4 grams of instant dried yeast and 40 grams of strong white bread flour. Now, if you haven't got a set of microscales for measuring small quantities of yeast, then you really should get some. They are an invaluable bit of kit for the home baker. Now, the ones I'm using are super budget friendly, they're accurate, they've served me extremely well. I'm going to link to them below, but have a search. You may actually find a better deal. Now, for my leaven, I'm mixing up 35 grams of room temperature water and 35 grams of strong white bread flour, and there's about 4 or 5 grams of starter that's already in the bottom of my jar. Now, mixing these up the night before we bake means they're happily going to ferment overnight and they'll be ready to rock and roll first thing in the morning. That's a scheduling 101 tactic. If you're not doing it, then you should give it a whirl. At 6:30 the next morning, we are ready to mix the dough. Now, this recipe, it uses a total of 141 grams of milk with 3.5% fat. Now, I've added 41 grams of that to my little pan. Next, I'll add 14 grams of sugar, 5 grams of salt and 22 grams of butter. Now that's going to sit on a gentle heat until that butter is melted and the salt and sugar have dissolved. Now, while we wait, we're going to weigh out 1 gram of instant dried yeast. Now, when our milky mixture is ready, we can add it to the remaining 100 grams of milk, which is still nice and cold from the fridge. This is a nice little trick to keep the dough temperature down, to keep it under control. Now, the instant dried yeast goes in first, and that's quickly followed by 213 grams of strong white bread flour. Now we can add the 55 grams of our sourdough leaven and of course the 69 grams of Poolish. That's our yeasted pre-ferment. Now, our dough is going to produce 4 130 gram hot dog buns, and they're 74% hydrated. But remember, the absorption capabilities and the strength of flour vary, so you should always be prepared to adjust, to tweak the hydration in your recipe to suit your flour. Now, once that dough comes together, we can leave it out just for 30 minutes covered to rest. After the rest, we're going to turn the dough out very quickly, and then we're going to knead it for about 30 seconds or so on the bench. No more. It's just to make sure that everything is well mixed. Now, the reason why we leave the dough to rest first is to give that flour time to hydrate, which makes the final mix really quick and easy. Right, so it's been 4 hours since we initially mixed our dough, and this is looking nice and puffed up and it is ready to shape. Now, personally, I begin by weighing the dough and then I divide it down equally by its weight. Now, this satisfies my baking OCD, but of course you can feel free to eyeball it if you prefer. Now, once I've shaped the dough into balls, I just leave it to relax on the bench for 5 minutes. Next, I dimple the dough out into a circle. I fold the top into the centre and push it down tight. I take the bottom, I fold that into the centre, and then I press that down. And then lastly, I bring the top half over the bottom half and then I seal it down nice and tight. Once all 4 pieces have been shaped, they can be left to rest for another 5 minutes. Next, I just repeat the same process with each piece of dough, but this time I try to maintain that elongated shape during the process. Now, I'm going to bake these in a non-stick tray, and I have specifically chosen a small tray because I want the dough to rise, to touch together, to fuse. And then after the dough is baked, these rolls kind of separate and the sides reveal this soft, pillowy crumb. Now, if you prefer a more classic hot dog style bun, you can use a larger tray and then just leave a nice gap of 3 to 4 centimetres between the dough. And that way, when they bake, you're going to get these nice single rolls that, as I said, look a bit more classic. They're your rolls, it's your choice. Now the dough can be covered and left to prove. Right, the buns have been proving for 1.5 hours since shaping, and they're nice and puffy, but they still feel stable, they feel firm. Now these are going to be baked directly on the middle shelf in an oven that's been preheated to 200 degrees Celsius. Now, I'm not using any baking steel or any baking stone, and my oven is set to conventional bake mode with no fan. Now these rolls took 14 minutes to bake properly in my oven, but I have been careful to monitor the colour of the crust. Now as soon as they come out of the oven, I rub them with a little bit of butter. That softens the crust down and it adds even more richness. These buns really are great for your bangers, your egg and bacon, your chip butties, as I said earlier, whatever you want. But I've got to say, I can't beat a decent banger and onion gravy. Don't forget, the full recipe is up on the website, linked down below. Thanks for watching, stay tuned, and I'll see you again very soon.